Only dollar store supplies for a whole week? I have to be honest, guys, I was not sure if I could actually follow through on this challenge because I really love my tried and true favorites, but I also needed a little twist to my regular daily art routine, and I thought this would give me a little kick in the pants. So first, let's see what I've got to work with this week, aka my dollar store haul. All right, so first up, I needed some paper, and paper thick enough that I could put watercolor on it. Now, the dollar store selection is thin, and thinner, so this was a bit tricky. I did manage to find this poster board, which does have a matte back. And so I'm hoping that I can use the back of this, cut it in some smaller pieces, and that will hold up okay to the watercolor and markers I'll be using this week. Next up, I use a lot of Sharpies in my work, so we'll see how these compare. I've got these knockoff Crayola markers. I'm going to try and use the black pen out of this package as my fine liner. I also found this brush pen, so I'm going to see how it works for my calligraphy practice. And of course, I had to find myself some watercolors and the dollar store brushes because I can't be cheating and using mine. And then these were an extra buy. I love adding glitter or sparkle to my pieces. I use a lot of metallics, so I thought these would be fun to try. All right, guys, so it is day one of this dollar store only challenge, and I am a little nervous, but I'm also really excited. I think this will be a lot of fun. All right, so this first day, I'm going to try out these dollar store watercolors, and of course, that means I'm also going to try out these brushes. Now, I will say, I started out trying this wet on wet to try and do some sort of sunset vibe here. Two problems. First, this paper was just destroyed by the wet on wet. You can kind of see in the image. And then also these brushes were so tiny and they held no pigment and no water, which meant that it was really, really tough to both mix the paint and get enough paint on the brush to actually get the look I was going for. I will also say these paints were very thick and waxy, which was another thing that made that mixing pretty difficult. So I learned my lesson, and for the C, I did just a wet on dry, no attempt at super intense blending here, and it turned out all right. The paper held up much better for that. Next up, I'm going for that dollar store knockoff Sharpie to try and color in this silhouette. So first I'm putting in two cliffs and then this walking bridge, and you can kind of see as I try and color in, it's not as opaque as a standard Sharpie usually is. I also had some difficulty with consistent markings, so if I wanted super thin or thick with regular Sharpies, I can usually get the thickness I want pretty consistently. With these, it was kind of a crapshoot, so I never really knew what the mark would look like on the page, and it got to be a little bit frustrating. Not too bad, but still definitely could tell the difference. And there we have it. Overall, I think it turned out okay, but obviously it definitely could have been better. All right, it's day two. I don't have too much time today. I'm pretty rushed, but I wanted to try out a quick doodle with these glitter paint pens. Let's see how it goes. All right, so I'm starting off with that knockoff Sharpie again for this outline. I wanted kind of a fun geometric flower vibe. And now I'm going in with that glitter sparkle paint pen. And these do activate similarly to typical paint pens, like if you have Poscas or anything like that, where you shake them really well and then gently press them several times to get that paint flowing down to that soft tip. And these actually flowed really well, really smoothly. I love the glitter. It doesn't pick up very well on the video, which I'm a little sad about, but they are really sparkly and it looked really cool in the final result. I'm now going back over with that black marker just to give really clean lines and cover up any overlap, and then with some little dot embellishments here for the finishing touches. I actually really love this. It was a lot of fun. All right, so it's day three today, and I do have a little bit more time today than I did yesterday, so I'm gonna give those watercolors another shot. I do know not to try wet on wet this time though, so let's see how it goes. All right, so I wanted to go for kind of a classic floral arrangement piece for this one, and I thought it would give me a chance to really use all of the colors and see how they all work together, the pigment depth and things like that. One thing that I realized very quickly was I can't lift these as well when they get mixed up in the pan. You can see that basically my white is now permanently a pink. And this also, I think, happened because there is very, very little paint in each of these pans, as you'd expect for a dollar store item. But this means that I really had to be careful with my mixing just to make sure that I really had the colors I needed, because I no longer had white after that very first mix with that red. So overall with the brushes, I mentioned before, it was really tough to get them to pick up enough pigment and water. So I found myself having to really do more coloring motions than the typical watercolor brush strokes that I would normally do. But overall, I was able to make it work pretty well. Now that it's dry, I'm going in with that black roller pen, my attempt at a fine liner, trying to add some of those embellishments, give it a little more depth and those finishing touches. There was some frustration here with this because it would frequently stop working, and I had a little scratch pad next to me where I'd have to try and get it going again, you know how you do. So I just had to keep trying, making those lines. But looking at the finished piece, I'm pretty surprised. I think it turned out all right. Not perfect, but I'm pretty happy with it. All right, so we're at day 4, the halfway point, and while I'm having a blast, I am starting to miss my regular art supplies. Today, I'm gonna see how some of these dollar store finds measure up when it comes to my daily lettering practice, especially this little brush pen that I found. So we'll see how this goes. So if I wanted to do a quick little comparison, first with this black roller pen, because I often use my microns to do this faux lettering. So that's where you basically write your letter and then you add in those thick spots by coloring them in. So I tried that first and it worked pretty well. Again, this roller pen doesn't go super smooth, but for just high, it worked pretty well. I probably wouldn't want to do a super long word or a long quote, for example, with it, because it would probably get really frustrating really fast. This brush pen was definitely pretty amazing, and I wish it showed up better on video, but it went on super smooth. The tip was nice and flexible, but not too flexible, where I had the control I needed to do those nice thick to thin lines and transitions. So this one I'm definitely a fan of, and I will be adding it to my regular calligraphy brush pen arsenal. Finally, using one of those kind of knockoff Crayola markers, because I do sometimes use Crayola markers in a pinch, but I wasn't super thrilled with this. You can see there's not a very big difference in my attempt at thick versus thin here, so this I probably wouldn't try again. Today I'm going to try one of those Neurographic art doodles that I've seen floating around, so I'm kind of looking forward to this. So I thought one of these fun Neurographic designs would be perfect for these rainbow colored markers. So first I started off with a random squiggle, and then I'm embellishing it here and there, adding some less random elements to it, then also smoothing those intersections to add to that neurographic feel. And then as I added the color, I really was trying to be somewhat random with it, although I started out with those hidden gems, as I called them, so that they were the colors that I needed them to be, the apple and the pumpkin and the flower and that bee, and then really going through and just trying to distribute those colors somewhat evenly and in an interesting way. And then once everything was colored, it was time to go in again with that black fine liner. Yes, it's a frustrating one, but it's something that I use in almost everything, so I just had to deal with it. So basically, I decided to align one pattern with each color, and so I would do the same pattern in each block of the image that had that color in it. And these patterns really just add some interest and dimension to the piece. I really love the final result. I think it's a lot of fun. All right, it is day 6 of this challenge, and today I'm gonna go back to one of my favorites, a silhouette marker doodle, rainbow style. So if you've been around my channel for very long, you've probably seen me do one of these with my Copic alcohol markers. Obviously these knockoff Crayolas are pretty different, but I wanted to see if I could get them to work in a similar way. So first I was trying to blend these a little bit to get a little more of a gradient here. It didn't quite work as I had hoped, but they did blend a teensy bit, as you can see. These tones are a lot more bright and rainbow-esque than I typically prefer, but you know, you work with what you've got. Next up, it's time to go in with that knockoff Sharpie again to put in those silhouette elements. So I started with the fisherman and then adding in the pole and the fish and these little trees. The trees were a bit of a challenge because, as I mentioned before, the consistency of markings with this pen is a challenge. And then going in in with my little gone fishing phrase up above. Again, made a little more difficult by the inconsistency in this knockoff Sharpie, but you know, I think it turned out pretty well. All right, so it's day 7. I could really use some relaxing art time today. So I'm gonna return to my tried and true watercolor blobs with some botanical doodles. Will it still be relaxing with dollar store supplies? Let's head inside and see. All right, so I wanted to use this one as an exercise in mixing because so far the projects that I've done with these watercolors, I haven't done much of that. I've mostly just used what's on the palette. So I wanted to see what kinds of different blues and greens I could get out of this very limited color palette. Overall, I was actually pretty impressed. I was able to get some pretty decent color depth and variation, and the mixing was actually easier than I thought it would be, especially given the real waxiness of these watercolors. Now that they're all dry, I'm going in again with my dysfunctional black liner pen, and I think using it all week was definitely affecting its usefulness for this one. This was definitely the most frustrated I had been with it. I was having to constantly go back to that scratch pad and get it to work again, and I honestly was just about to throw it out the window. I really do love the final product here though, and I'm pretty impressed that this came from dollar store supplies. Oh my gosh, I made it! And I even found some new favorites. So this brush pen and these glitter paint pens are definitely on my new favorites list. But let's look at the frustration meter for the rest of those dollar store art supplies. The markers and the knockoff Sharpies were okay. And the paper hack is good if maybe you're still learning and you have that psychological barrier to not wanting to ruin real watercolor paper. It worked okay, especially if you weren't trying to do wet on wet. But as you can see, that frustration meter was really high for the watercolor paints, the paint brushes, and that black fine liner pen. So those are things I would probably recommend spending a few more dollars for somewhere else. Now, here is my creative challenge for you. Go to your dollar store with a budget, say $5, and see what you can find in their art supply aisle. Now, no, you don't have to necessarily put yourself through the torture of only using those supplies for a whole week, although if you do want to do that challenge, go for it and let me know how it goes in the comments. But even if you're just playing with these here and there, they can do 2 things. First, they can mix things up a little bit and give you a little bit of creative exploration fun that won't break your bank. And second, they can really help you appreciate those good art supplies that you may have needed to invest a little bit more in. Now, if you're looking for budget-friendly art supplies that are still high quality, definitely check out this video right up here where I put the new paint pens from my paints to the test. They really knocked my socks off. So I will see you over there. Happy creating!